without slides for a good.
This was a very exciting session indeed. Thank you very much for the panelists. And now I'd like to welcome you all to start the new session of this afternoon, which is Making More Than Wood and Money. What do investors need to know to invest in forests? And I'd like to invite Martin Hale, Program Manager from Climate Finance Unit, UNEP. Please welcome to the floor. And I'm going to ask you to invite all the other panelists to join you at the table.
Well,
thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. If I can ask Maria and Anne Arvala to join me, please. All right. Thank you. As mentioned, my name is Martin Halley. I work as a program manager for the Climate Finance Unit of UNEP, based in Geneva. I'd like to start by thanking the hosts for all the hard work in putting this great session together and for giving us such a wonderful panel to discuss the question today. Together with me today on stage, we have Anne Arvala, who's a senior Development Impact Advisor for FinFund, the Finnish Development Finance Agency, and Maria Laura Quevedo Fernandez, who's a research professor at the Universidad Nacional de Asunción in Paraguay. Joining us online, we have Mr. Somvang Phimavong, who's Deputy Director General at the Department of Forestry within the Ministry for Agriculture and Forestry of Laos. We have Mr. Alexander Horst, who's a Senior Sectoral Specialist for Forestry and Forest Industries at EIB, the European Investment Bank. And also online, Mr. Jens Mackensen, who's Head of Biodiversity and Sustainable Resources Management at KfW, the German Development Finance Institution. Before handing over to the panel to discuss, I'd just like to give a few thoughts of my own just to frame the session. And I'd like to thank all the sessions prior to this one for already clearing a lot of what I had intended to say, including the fact that it's clear that the role of forests in meeting humanity's development goals has been widely recognized, and there's no longer a need to make that case anymore. We've also seen that traditionally, we've looked more to the protection and conservation of natural forests to give us the environmental and social benefits that we expect from forests, while we looked more at commercial forestry to provide production and profitability. Now, I think that not only in forestry, but across all of land use, that sharp distinction is something that is being called into question. It's clear that no more can we be expending a lot of effort on conservation and protection on the one hand, while leaving untouched a productive land use system that contributes to the environmental degradation that we're trying to fight. There is a need for the productive side of forestry to play its part there as well. So the question is, how do we realize this potential of commercially managed forests to provide more than wood and money? We've heard already quite a few examples in the previous sessions today, but it's clear that at the minimum, we need businesses to come up with innovative new land use models and business models that combine profitability with better social and environmental outcomes. But we also need investors to provide capital to these businesses to innovate and thrive. Now, my perspective on this comes from managing the Restoration Seed Capital Facility. This is a facility set up by UNEP and the Frankfurt School of Finance and Management. And we support fund managers to set up funds and invest in projects that contribute to forest restoration. And one of the funds we invest in is a good example of the kind of innovative solution that we need. The Arboro Fund that was mentioned just in the previous session by Ludwig is dedicated to sustainable forestry, and it brings best practices in sustainable forest management, including protection and restoration of up to 30% of the land holdings or more that they have. They also bring innovative practices such as silvopastoral management systems, and develop the local value chains for the timber industry where they operate. Through the operation of this fund, they intend to sequester up to 30 million tons of CO2 and create 5,000 jobs. Now, that's just one example, and we've heard many more today that make it very clear that commercial forestry can produce more than wood and money. It can participate in ecosystem restoration, contribute to biodiversity conservation, maximize its contributions to climate change mitigation and adaptation, and better contribute to the livelihoods of communities that live within and around the forest. However, this kind of investment remains very much a niche and far from standard practices in the industry. And what we can see from our side, from the Restoration Seed Capital Facility that provides support to these dedicated type of investment funds, is that it remains very difficult, actually, to get investors to come on board for this kind of solution. So this brings us really to the topic of today. What can be done to secure more investment in the kind of forestry that generates more than wood and money? And to provide us with her perspective on the question, I'd like to pass the floor to our first panelist, Ms. Anne Arvola from FinFund. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you for the organizers as well for inviting FinFund to give us some insights of an investor perspective among other investors here present today. And I have to agree, Martin, that the previous sessions have given a perfect background for us to continue the discussion. So, like I said, I'm Anne Arvola from FinFund, a Finnish Development Financing Institute. And we are actually an exception among the development financing institutes, DFIs, in that sense that we are very focused in forestry. We have about 1 million portfolio, which makes us quite a small one. But in terms of forestry, we are a big DFI because some 15–16% of our investments are in forestry sector. So maybe we'll take the first slide. If it works. Yes. Perfect. Oh, too fast. Go back. Yes, perfect. So like I said, the previous sessions have prepared the ground perfectly for this session. And my message maybe here is that we've heard what's being discussed there out in the big world and in the forums. So the two key messages maybe came from the IPCC latest report, plus the Glasgow COP meeting, in a sense that they truly highlighted the importance of nature and biodiversity conservation in the context of climate change. And that is a message that I think at least DFIs have taken very seriously and are now working to find ways to invest more in biodiversity, for example. And some of the initiatives and frameworks now being in progress and under preparation are actually supporting us in that work, in that sense that already the task force for nature-related financial disclosures has been mentioned. That's something we will follow up to start being more open in reporting our nature-related risks. Then also the science-based targets is there under preparation, and that's something we have a keen look on to be more open on what we are already doing, I would say, because at least in FinFund, our investee companies, they are already doing a very good job. We are applying performance standards of the IFC, which give us a very good frame to manage the risks. And now it's time to turn those risks into opportunities, I would say, and make our work more visible. So because the business case for biodiversity and nature is still, it's small, and it often requires that philanthropic part of financing to really make any sense. What we are now looking at is that to what extent we could enforce our efforts in combining the climate benefits, climate mitigation, with those restoration opportunities. And a practical experience of FinFund comes from Nicaragua, where we are financing a company called MLR. It's an agroforestry company planting cocoa and teak in areas with extremely high biodiversity and next to conservation areas. And the company has already been very committed to conservation work, but we want to take it to the next level with some technical support so that they can finalize, improve their plans in terms of biodiversity management, and then supporting them in those restoration activities included in those plans. And our part of that is then that by investing in the restoration activities, we will get our share of the high-value carbon credits created in those restoration activities. And these experiences we will hope then to use with other investee companies as well. But because it's been a lot of talk about carbon and biodiversity, I think the next slide also reminds us of the commercial side, the traditional commercial side of investments, because we were asked to refer what are the raising opportunities in forestry. And I think the two main ones at the moment are the already mentioned increasing carbon price, which makes investing in carbon as well interesting for an investor. But then there's also the commercial perspective of changing markets. The very recent happenings in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine has drastically changed the wood markets because we are missing one important exporter from the market now, and that actually opens up opportunities for emerging countries, emerging forest countries. So we'll see how that will then turn to increasing interest among investors as well in forestry. Because the challenge is that we are not many. FinFund we can call ourselves as an experienced forestry investor, and we are ready to take the risks, but many are not. Like mentioned, that it's investing in forestry has been very much focusing on the risks and not recognizing the opportunities, and that remains the case. Education, awareness raising among investors is needed because investors see the time required in any forestry investment as an obstacle. It's too long for a standard investor. Even among our peers, among DFIs, the time may be too long. Also, scale has been mentioned. I think it was Pierre who mentioned that the scale is often still too small. Yes, it is, considering the costs related to investing in a forest company. Profits, well, they are not the highest, so not very attractive for many investors. And in combination with the high risks associated, that's a serious obstacle. Also, even though here we are very aware of how it should be done properly, obviously many forest project developers are not. Because even FinFund, which is applying the IFC-PS framework, we often find that there are many gaps in the environmental social performance of the companies. And one important area where much more work should be done is land acquisition, because often the roots of failure are already originated in the acquisition process, which has not considered social aspects, for example, properly. And we need to keep in mind that when we talk about biodiversity, there are trade-offs between carbon sequestration and biodiversity creation. So that's also something, at least with the present market situation, needs to be kept in mind. And then, at least here in Europe, where I come from, we've been following up the development of sustainable finance framework development in the EU. And to me, it looks that they may, in the future, bring us tightening requirements in terms of the permanence and also additionality in terms of carbon, which may then turn into, I would say, an additional challenge for many reforestation and afforestation projects, because they are not considered sustainable in the EU taxonomy regulation. So maybe a little bit, I would say, boring ending to talk about EU taxonomy as a challenge. But in big picture, I would say that investors, they are truly paying attention. They are interested in the challenge is now to really increase your awareness and reduce the bottlenecks so that the money will start truly flowing in. Thank you, Martin.
Not at all. Thank you. Thank you very much for that perspective. That's great. Thank you. With that, I would like to check online if we have Mr. Somvang from Laos, who is ready to join us and provide his presentation.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone.
Hello, we can
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can hear
Hello?
you.
Yes, okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So my name is Sombang Pibabong, currently the DDG at the Department of Forestry, Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry of Laos PDR. So today I will talk about the government of Laos vision on the development of sustainable tree plantation sectors. So as you know, Laos has still large amounts of degraded forest land in a very climate condition, which is very suitable for industry tree plantation development. So the forest lands are around the country. So there are substantial potential to generate the income for the investors and the governments and the local people in the countries. So Laos has about a total of 23 million hectares of lands across 4 land categories. So these lands are classified into 4 categories, that is production forest with about 3 million and area outside 3 forest categories. So of these 4 categories, we have Laos has potentially about 3 million hectares of degraded forest land and land that could be explored for development of sustainable plantation in the future. So the tree plantation sector has very high potential to become the 3rd industrial sectors of Laos PDRs. So from the analysis, we see that the total direct and indirect revenue from tree plantations sector could be as large as those from hydropower and minings, and also other main activity in a natural resource sector. This is very high potential. And on the other hand, so Laos is very attractive location and could attract many sustainable plantation company who can create additional value for Laos PDR and who can guarantee for sustainability. So first of all, so we have a significant areas of potential suitable forest, as I mentioned before, and the population density is very low comparing to the neighboring countries. And that more importantly, there is a growing global wood market, especially we have the China market just next to doors. And more recently, we have a railway station can be used as a very efficient transportation from Laos to China. It takes only 4 hours to export any wood plantation product in the future. And recently, the government also has opened the country by having some recent reform on the forestry sectors. So this factor can give the Laos with significant chance to attract a high quality investment. So here is some example benefit that Laos PDR can have if we can have about 600,000 hectares for plantation developments. As you can see here, the GDP can increase by 25%. So export earning can be expanded by 40%. And the foreign direct investment can boost doubles. And importantly, it can create a job more than 1,500 people. And this can secure the livelihood of rural peoples. And some achievement in over the past 10 years, so important thing is the government intervention in 2018 with aroused the plantation concession in the production forest, and we have a lot of regulation and legal framework has improved very significantly, and the government is very committed to the one-stop services. Nevertheless, there are some key challenges. So we still lack a fully workable approach to how to deal with the informal land use in the concession areas, and the process to allocate tree plantation concession is still cumbersome, especially the SIA and one-stop service. And is implemented inconsistently. And the policy legal frameworks and for outgrowers and smallholders, even though has improved, but some qualities remains. So we still need greater capacity to administer and enforce the regulatory framework consistently and effectively. So here is the primary action. We can bring about a better environment and social outcome. So first priority, we will define clear approach on how to deal with informal lands in concession areas. So secondly, improve the process of allocating concession for tree plantings. And thirdly, to improve the policies and regulatory framework for smallholder-based timber production. And the fourth priority is to increase effectiveness of monitoring and law enforcement in concession for tree plantation. So we have the vision for the future. So as I mentioned before, the development of tree plantation and wood processing industry in Laos have a large potential for growth because there is a market demand of wood waste and fast-growing wood product and many interested investors. So this had created an exceptional opportunity for quality growth. So as mentioned by Mr. Juan, the IFC Asia Pacific regional lead this morning, that so to enable this, the government of Laos will focus on attracting quality investors to ensure that their activity are environmentally, socially sustainable, commit to providing long-term benefit to Laos society as a whole. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this fascinating perspective from the side of the country, and it's very clear that the investment opportunities are there. To continue, I would like to see if we have Mr. Alexander Horst online and ready to provide his presentation. Thank you. Alexander, if you can hear us.
Yes, I hear you. Sorry. Yeah.
Perfect. No, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Martin, for the invitation. Dear participants, dear colleagues, it's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I'm wondering, let me ask you, are you hearing me well? And you see my presentation, yes?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
But the presentation is still being uploaded.
Okay, wait a moment, why? New share. I have the message, participants can now see your screen. So could you show it on? Okay, here it is.
There we go. There, we're all set. Thank you. You can begin.
Okay, let me first start to shortly present who EIB is. EIB is the lending arm of the European Union, created in 1958. We are actually owned by the EU member states. We are the biggest multilateral financial institution in the world. Since last year, we are also the EU Climate Bank. So we are one of the largest providers of climate finance for achieving the Green Deal and also our own, let's say, climate roadmap. And I mean, we also operate worldwide. We have partnerships for more than 50 years in over 160 countries. And I mean, lately we have also created EIB Global, but I mean, about still 90% of our funds go actually to European member states. Yeah, I mean, the bank promotes operations that contribute to the objectives of the EU Agenda 2030, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the EU policy framework for forests. such as the EU's action to protect and restore the world's forest, with particular focus on conservation of primary forests, but also restoration of degraded forests in a sustainable and responsible way. The overall aim is to enhance forest protection and to ensure growth of the world's forest covers, thereby improving people's health and livelihoods. Halting deforestation and forest degradation combined with sustainable restoration, and afforestation activities complemented by sustainable forest management provide opportunities for economic development, enabling sustainable production and consumption of agricultural and forest-based products. EIB's financing to the forest sector focuses on investments promoting sustainable forest and land management practices which deliver on climate mitigation, climate adaptation, environmental protection, and biodiversity targets. So the next slide shows our global lending volumes in the forest sector. I mean, you can say during the last decade, in average, we invested about €1 billion in the forest sector. And key performance indicators are like 200,000 of new hectares were planted each year. 350,000 hectares of degraded or damaged forests were rehabilitated. We reduced about 5 million tons of carbon CO2 emissions, and we created more than 400,000 full-time equivalent jobs. The EIB Group has extensive institutional experience in financing sustainable forestry operations and stands ready to support the EU and its member states in implementing of their commitments under the Global Forest Finance Pledge. The EIB Group has been lending to the forest sector for over 40 years and consolidated its position as one of the largest global financiers of forestry sector investments. Through its climate roadmap, the EIB committed to strengthen its support for long-term investment in the forestry sector with focus on environmental protection, nature conservation, and sustainable production of renewable biomaterials, including research, development, innovation projects. Besides, the EIB will help implement concrete measures to support deforestation-free value chains and an ambitious post-2020 global deal for nature to be adopted at the 15th conference of the party to the UN Convention of Biological Biodiversity. I mean, basically, EIB follows a value chain approach. So we invest in the primary forestry sector. Here we focus particularly on sustainable forest management, biodiversity, and ecosystems. I mean, internally we have certain eligibilities, and the most important one is natural resource use management and protection. And this basically focuses on improved efficiency, you can say, in forest management. And we also have cost-cutting eligibilities, for instance, climate action and environmental sustainability. As an EU bank, we need to follow the EU taxonomy, which the previous speaker, Anna, was already mentioning, which poses some challenges to the sector, which we fully agree. I mean, but yeah, I mean, through our primary sector, we contribute to mitigation, also to adaptation, biodiversity, and certain activities are excluded from financing, like the conversion of natural forests to plantations, destruction of critical habitats, extensive monoculture plantations, conversion of dryland to irrigated forest plantations. And then we also support forest-based industries. So eligibility is, for instance, innovative SMEs and mid-caps, bioenergy, research, innovation, and digital. And again, I mean, cost-cutting eligibility is also climate action and environmental sustainability. And I mean, these projects normally contribute to mitigation, to circular economy, pollution prevention, and we exclude feedstock, which can serve as food and feed. So, I also want to shortly present our requirements, which we have for bankable projects, because I thought this is for potential investors important to know. I mean, of course, one important aspect are the financial and economic aspects. Normally require that our operations address some market failures in the forest sectors. And of course, they need to fulfill our mandates and eligibilities. Then, I mean, the investment should be feasible to the investors in financial terms. But I think at the same time, there should be some based on realistic assumptions. And not like so I think this is important for us. And so we are also maybe ready to consider, less high internal rate of returns. And for us, it's also very important are the broader economic returns to the society, which should exceed the financial rate of return. This requires that all externalities are factored in, and if possible, also monetarized. For example, through payment for ecosystem services. Then, for us, it's important that the market for forest and non-forest products is thoroughly analyzed. And what is, based on our experience, also very important that there's a favorable policy and legal institutional framework to leverage forest investments. Okay, my last slide is related to the environmental, climate, and social aspects. We actually apply our own environmental and social sustainability framework to all our operations with the aim to only support projects with positive and acceptable levels of footprint, which are aligned with EU legislation. In February this year, our board of directors approved the revised environmental and social sustainability framework following an extensive public consultation, including the environmental and social policy, the gender strategy, and environmental and social standards. Recognizing that the rural poor depend heavily on ecosystem services for their livelihoods, the EIB group will seek to pursue synergies between environmental and social goals across EIB support for nature by targeting and involving local communities, including women and indigenous groups. And then also, usually in our operations, we require that the promoter is considering forest certification or chain of custody certification, at least to establish a roadmap, that defines steps towards certification. And another important aspect is that the land and tree tenure rights should be clear and that there are some benefit sharing arrangements in place in case, for instance, of customary land tenure. Then we have our own carbon footprint methodology, so we need to calculate the carbon, footprint and the climate carbon sequestration and reduce emissions if this is the case. And one last important point is procurement. If you lend to our loans, and we require that our guide to procurement is to be followed, which is particularly important for public sector projects, in order to make sure that we have fair competition and no local preference. With this, I would like to close my presentation. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much for providing this perspective from the European Investment Bank. Without any further ado, I'd like to see if we have Mr. Jens Mackensen online to provide his presentation from the KfW.
Good morning all, and greetings from Frankfurt in Germany. I hope you can all hear and see me.
We can hear you fine, and I think we're just waiting for the image to come online.
There's no presentation to let me start by saying that. I rather prefer to give an oral presentation. I hope that works well for you as well. Maybe as a starting point, really, who is KfW? For those who don't know, it's the German Development Bank. We work on behalf of the German government, and I specifically work on issues related to forest protection, forest management, and forest restoration. And it's the latter point where I'd like to talk about today. And since the initial question was what is required on the investor side to invest in forest restoration, particularly, and I believe I like to outline 4 major items, and I like to sustain them by giving examples for each 4 of them. So the 4 points I like to outline here in terms of requirements for investment really is impact and sustainability.
Sorry, Jens, I'm having a bit of a technical issue with the sound.
Yeah, I was a bit confused by it, but I hope it works now. Okay, let me start again. So the 4 items which I like to highlight here and support by 4 short examples are mainly impact and sustainability for one. Obviously, then a functioning policy framework, particularly on issues such as land title, a strong social support, involving obviously the non-public and the public sector, and obviously sound investment ideas and innovation. There's still a funny sound, but I hope. Shall I continue, or?
Can you just, do we need 1 second, I think, to figure out what the issue is here? They are, yeah.
It sounds better now. Shall I continue?
Yes, please, let's give it a try.
I'm sorry for this.
It's not on your side, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, just to repeat shortly these 4 items which I like to highlight as an investor requirement, at least as far as the German Development Bank is concerned, and let me also allow me to also sustain that by 4 short examples. So as I said, for us, impact and sustainability is certainly among a key requirement. I come to details later on that. A second issue is, of course, based on our experience, that there's a strong policy framework, particularly on issues such as land titling. Thirdly, I like to highlight the need for social support by various groups in society, as well as obviously the public sector. And lastly, I like to mention that there needs to be, obviously, since we talk investments, sound investment in economic data and figures and innovation. Having said that, let me start by mentioning these 4 examples very quickly. So the first one would be the Eco Business Fund. The Eco Business Fund is a currently $600 million US structured investment fund, which was set up by KfW along with partners. And it's based in Luxembourg. It's funding forestry. Also, the majority of investments are in agriculture, but it's funding forestry measures. Roughly 10% of the amount is invested in forestry. And the requirement really here is that there are strong sustainability standards being applied by the actual company. So it should be certified labels, FSC just being one example, but that really is a key requirement for us joining in an investment in that particular group. Important to note is that we work all the way through local banks. So we provide the refinancing for local banks and the investment is done through the local bank. And that's an important point because here already what is required and not, in most cases, not easily available is, of course, that there's an existing relationship between forest enterprise and the local banks. This is an issue. It's also an issue that, of course, local banks look at forest investments in very different ways. Often they shy away from it because the risks are not necessarily well known or well studied. Hence, part of our work really is to convince local banks in handling local investments in forestry issues. And certification of investments or certification of operations really help in doing so, gaining the understanding in local banks that the risk is minimized. Important to note here is that we have nearly 40% of private investors invested in the fund. That is a very high figure for these kinds of structured investment funds. And they're mainly there, these investors are mainly in there for two reasons. First is, of course, they do have a return, but more importantly, or equally important, there's an impact. And the impact, as I mentioned before, is through the proven sustainable management of such operations. And I believe that really makes a difference. And hence, that to me is also proof that it's possible to convince hard-nosed public and private investors in investing in forest issues if the overall setting is right. Of course, what helps in these structured investment funds is the fact that public investors, such as KfW, taking on the first loss tranche, which is enabling them private investors to have a bit of a buffer, a risk buffer, in terms of their investment. Okay, let me go on to another example, the National Reforestation Program in Vietnam. Really there, the cornerstone is that smallholders received public land titles for an area as large as ever integrated land.
Sorry, we've lost your sound there, Jens. I don't know if you touched your microphone.
You lost my sound?
You're back.
Okay. I'm saying that in that reforestation program in Vietnam, the fact that landholders gained the land title was key, was decisive for an investment by international donors. And as you know, I mean, reforestation, you have this cash flow gap, meaning that in the first couple of years, 8 to 10 years in average, there's no cash flow coming in. And what we try to achieve is to create an opportunity to secure these cash flow through grant-based financing, enabled through setting up what we call green saving accounts. So making sure that each smallholder gets access to his own or her own saving account, which contained an amount of funds which were to be drawn by the smallholder according to the progress in the tending of that particular site. And it was quite amazing really to see with such a simple bridge financing how then the restoration measures succeeded. And after 10 years, I mean, the volume on the green saving account was obviously used up. However, the timber standing on that site surpassed the volume of that farm income by 10 times, often enough. So that to us was a very good example of a good policy framework, which is supported by innovative financing. Another example, the third one really is maybe referring to the restoration activities in the Mata Atlântica in Brazil. Let me shortly mention here that there is the Atlantic Forest Restoration Pact, which is a very convincing alliance of different actors, obviously public actors and social actors. And I like to highlight that for the strong social support. The different activities, and there are dozens of different activities, really are all driven by very strong technical experience on reforestation schemes. And they're driven by a strong backing from various social groups and political groups. And that really made all the difference. In the financing side, obviously, it was still based on or dependent on grant financing. However, there was a lot of experiencing going on with, for example, CO2 certificates. We heard about it today. There was a lot of experience going on with payment for ecosystem services, for example, specific payments for water services. And all that really made a strong impact on us, and that was a reason. I mean, this strong social support was a reason why we supported the program in various ways. And lastly, let me highlight something which doesn't really exist yet, but we are very hopeful to be able to pull it off this year, and we call it the Forest Action Facility. And that is a facility which is to focus on restoration worldwide, obviously in countries with partnership with the German corporation. However, the focus is on restoration. We're very proud to be able to say that we are setting it up as a limited company along with IUCN and the IUCN FLR, Forest Landscape Restoration Hub. This is to happen this year. The support is really, in essence, investment in restoration. And basically, learning from the three other examples I've mentioned so far, we attempt to pull that all together, the experience, and make investment calls under these country windows or regional windows in order then to call for a competitive promotion of good innovative ideas with strong social support, obviously, with the right policy framework, and obviously also with a sound economic setting. But we believe that that instrument will be able to offer particularly a missing link in forest restoration, as to the fact that we be able to finance grant-based, finance for smallholders the cash flow gap for the first couple of years, but also be able to design, for example, loan-based instruments which target then, for example, the need by private sector investors to de-risk their investments in forest restoration. That's about it. Thank you for your patience, and back to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Jens, and apologies for the technical difficulties. All right, thank you very much, and I'd just like to pass to the last member of our panel, Professor Maria Lara Quevedo Fernandez, who has authored a paper on Korean investment in the Paraguayan forestry sector. Maria will be speaking in Spanish, and there is translation available for the machines on your seats for those who want to follow it. Please.
Thank you. Bueno, les voy a presentar sobre las inversiones coreanas en el sector forestal paraguayo.
Well, it's my great honor to speak about Korean investment in the Paraguayan forestry sector. There are some Korean forestry companies working in Paraguay. Paraguay is located in the southern part of America. We have about 7 million population, and geographically we can categorize the country into two parts. One is northern part, and the other one would be the southern part, or the upper and lower part. Starting from 2014, we do have the Act on the Prevention of Deforestation. For example, for the northern area, the climate is really good, and eucalyptus is the main tree species. Recently, afforestation has been increased, and we do have a company called Paracel, and the company established the very first pulp plant in the country. When it comes to the business climate, the climate is very good in Paraguay. The climate and soil are very favorable, and it is more so for the eucalyptus. And it is located at the center of the South America, so it's really good to have the good market access to the neighboring countries. And relatively speaking, macroeconomic situation is very stable. And 100% renewable energy is being used. And the electronic energy, the fare for the electricity is very low, and there is a huge potential for the industry with added value to grow. And taxation, or the tax rate, is low. And the laws are very good to protect the investment and international commerce. And that's why back in 2011, Korea Forest Service started to form a relationship, the cooperative relationship with us through the Korean Forestry Promotion Institution. So the market survey has been started in 2011 by the Korean organization KFPI. And then that was followed by the restoration project. And in 2019, 300 hectares of the forest has been afforested. And SJ Green is one of the Korean company, and Hanpa would be the Korean company invested in Paraguay. In case of the SJ Green, it is also involved in the afforestation project. There is a lot of lodging going on in the area where the SJ Green is involved, and there are also conflicts in that area. But still, the afforestation project there created a lot of jobs and contributed significantly to the local community. And most of the plantation focused on the eucalyptus, as you can see from the picture. And particularly, this is done to have the pulp and also as a source of energy generation. And at the same time, forestry project is also going on. And not only the native trees, but also the foreign trees are being planted. I am showing some pictures. As you can see here, for several years, we have been doing this plantation work in this area. And the pruning is also done. As for the pruning, as you can see from the graph, you can see the quantity or the amount of pruning done and the maximum height which is applied for the pruning operation. Next slide, please. We also do the thinning operation at 2 to 3 year interval. There are the products coming from the thinning project, which includes wood chips. And wood chips are mostly used or sent to other processing plants for further operation. Next slide, please. And after 10 to 12 years, as you can see here, there is a rolling processing going on. So the materials from this plantation related activities are used for various areas of the forestry industry. And if you have any questions, please click on this code, QR code, and you can leave your questions.
Just a few questions, because there was a lot to unpack from all of these presentations, and I'll unfortunately have to favor the people who are here in the room with me. So I'll start with Anne. You mentioned that one of the main obstacles you see, you mentioned many of the obstacles that you see to fully private investors coming in to these kind of innovative forestry projects. Some of them are unavoidable, such as timescales, but You mentioned one that's often mentioned, and that's the risk versus return profile, and especially the risk. And I wanted to just get your opinion on whether those risks are actual or are objective risks, or are they perceived risks that are maybe due to poor understanding of the sector by private investors, and something that we, as a community could work on to attract more private investment in this kind of innovative forestry?
Thank you, Martin. Well, I would say that it depends on the case. In many cases, yes, they may be only perceived risks. But like I said, even for a DFI like FinFund, who has a lot of experience in forestry, still it's complicated to find a project that fits into our criteria of investment in terms of financial return and environmental, social sustainability, and also the impact. And I think we are operating, of course, in emerging markets, in developing countries, where the setting is always, I would say, nearly always, very, very challenging. So, looking at of our investee companies and how they have performed over the years, the risk is also real, in that sense that also our forestry experts in-house in FinFund, they've been really working hard together with the companies to reach the break-even. So I think some of the risks, yes, they may be perceived, but at least from financial perspective, they are still the real ones as well.
No, thank you very much. I think that's really important to bear in mind. I mean, we hear a lot about the opportunities for investment, but we have to recognize that these are still fairly innovative solutions and with inherent risk as well, which does deter some of the investment. So just to close off, I'd like to ask one question to Maria, if you can. It would be really interesting to hear what your perception is from the context of Paraguay, of how you see the evolution either in demand for more sustainable production on the plantations that you mentioned, and whether that demand comes more from the customer sector, or is there any move from the government and regulators to be imposing more strict standards on production?
Bueno, uno de los principales motivos que aumentó la demanda fue la ley de deforestación cero. Se prohibió el cambio de uso de la tierra y casi todos los productos forestales.
As for the land use, there is a strict regulation on land use. So when it comes to the forestry, as the profitability goes up, the outside investors are coming to Paraguay. The Korea would be a prime example of such efforts. And the cellulose plant that I showed during my presentation can be a good example. FSC certification, actually, that company is the only company in Paraguay which received the FSC certification. Many industries are using woods, and the need to use the certified wood is on rise. I think many industries actually realize, and there is a trend for many industries to use the certified timber or wood. So that is for sure that the protection for the forestry is on the rise.
All these perspectives, both from the investment side and from the country perspective, both from Laos and Paraguay. I'd like to thank you very much, all members of the panel here and online, and once again, the organizers.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks again to the speakers. We'll now have a half-hour break for coffee, so and then we'll move into the last few sessions of the day. So see you back at 4:30. Thank you.